This close, Mountaineer fans, as the Oklahoma Sooners defeat the West Virginia Mountaineers 16-13, a walk-off game-winning field goal for the Oklahoma Sooners. Right now, the number 4 team in the country, but it remains to be seen if they stay there or if they really have shown anyone else that they're the number 4 team in the country, because the unranked Mountaineers come off of the big win over Virginia Tech, go to Oklahoma, and almost pick up the first road victory over a top 5 team in program history, which is still amazing to think about for the 15th winningest program in college football history. The Mountaineers lose it 16-13. This is your WVU postgame show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live, and of course, WV Sports Now. I'm your host, as always, Mike Asti, and I am joined by our Karl Ludwig of WV Sports Now to recap this game, talk about what West Virginia did well, if they let this game get away, if Oklahoma was able to steal it, how maybe good is Oklahoma or not so good for Oklahoma, and then, of course, onward and upward for the Mountaineers. Karl, to get us started, though, to me, and I said this to you off the air, this felt like all the way through a close one that the Mountaineers were going to eventually lose. Of course, going into the game, I didn't think it'd be a close one. The spread didn't say that, but once the game got moving, Oklahoma didn't appear to have anything going on offensively. Their home crowd is booing their future NFL draft pick quarterback, looking for another 5-star kid to come in. Jarret Doege had some wolf passes, but did enough, didn't make horrendous mistakes. His one pick there was basically like a punt. Garett Greene came in, was able to run a keeper into the end zone. But you can't also say that West Virginia looked that great or did tons to help them win, because they only have 13 points on the board, and they needed more, obviously, offensively to beat a team like Oklahoma, who you would have figured would have scored more than 16. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings before we fully unpack this after West Virginia loses 16-13 on the road against the current number 4 team in the country, Oklahoma Sooners?
Well, before the season began, we discussed this game kind of in depth with what they had to do to show that they're back and playing well. And if we looked back then and said that West Virginia lost off a walk-off field goal after having the lead or being tied most of the game, it'd feel great.
Sure.
After watching that game, it's a disappointment. I mean, how the game turned out, how the game played out, it was a game that West Virginia kind of let slip by, to be honest. I mean, they weren't good enough to win it in the end, but throughout the game, they showed enough to kind of be the team that had the chance to win it, and they kind of just slipped by them.
So would you classify the game then as one that West Virginia let get away? Is this going to be remembered even for years from now as one West Virginia let get away, especially with Oklahoma leaving the Big 12 soon? Obviously, that could be 3 years from now. That could even be next year, because we don't know what's going on in terms of college football realignment. If they don't get one against Oklahoma, is that going to feel like, from this Big 12 era with Oklahoma, that that's the one they let get away?
Well, I mean, there's been some close calls over the years. I mean,
right, yeah, the 1-point loss with Austin, of course, yeah.
But tonight, definitely, number 9 hurts. This 9 in a row now. They were probably the better team for most of the game. The defense was phenomenal. The offense really let one slip by here. But yeah, I think this is maybe not for years to come, but this is definitely one that will sting for a long time. A win here would have been enormous. I mean, Oklahoma might not be that good in the grand scheme of things, but being a top 5 team on the road would have been a huge boost for this team, and it would have been a huge jumping point into the rest of the season. But now, I mean, they're coming off a big loss. They're 2-2 now. There's still a lot of questions to be answered. So it really is just a missed opportunity here. And
I think it's a missed opportunity, to say the least, because honestly, if West Virginia beat Oklahoma, even if it's a down Oklahoma team who people don't feel is really a playoff team, they still went in the game as the number 4 team in the country, who at that point was undefeated. If West Virginia beat the Sooners after beating the then 15th ranked Virginia Tech team, even if Virginia Tech is no longer ranked, that'd be back-to-back victories over 2 top 15 teams. the only other team that has that's Alabama, for crying out loud right now. Obviously, they're going to stack them. West Virginia may not. But again, as we stood right now, if West Virginia got the victory, that would be back-to-back top 15 victories. And there would actually be people who would then be saying, oh, my God, if West Virginia would have cut down the turnovers against Maryland and got that victory, West Virginia would be ranked inside the top 15, let alone be ranked after that victory. And I think guaranteedly West Virginia would have moved all the way into the top 25 after beating Oklahoma, I would imagine. It doesn't happen. It's not going to happen. A close loss stings. It ends up still being a loss. This is a West Virginia team that now has been a roller coaster ride all year. Again, Karl Ludwig here joining me from WVU Sports now, of course, on our WVU postgame show here on PSL. Mike Asti and the Mountaineers do lose it, a heartbreaker of sorts, 16-13 on the road against Oklahoma. Now, in terms of this game, because I think we agree that West Virginia kind of let one get away, but I think we also agree that it's not like West Virginia was dominant and let one get away. Yeah. I don't know if the feeling of this loss is the same as losing 1 point when Tavon Austin had 6 touchdowns and 500 and plus yards. Of course, the defense allowing them down that, allowing them to let down that game. But what did West Virginia not do enough of in this game? It still felt like the game plan really didn't get administered by the Mountaineers, even though they lost a close one. It almost kind of feels like that Oklahoma put up their D- effort, and that's why it was close. And if Oklahoma would have been close to what they could have been, even with this group that's lesser than recent years, it then could have been a blowout.
Yeah, defense, like we mentioned, was great. And then the offense, it really comes down to the offense just being super, super inconsistent. The first drive of the game was a masterclass of offensive play calling, of execution from both quarterbacks, from receivers. It was a perfect play call, perfect almost every play. And 9 minutes off the clock, touchdown. You can't start off better than that.
Right.
That was perfection. But after that, it really just went downhill. And for a while, the 2 QB set worked. But with 3.5 to go,
sure,
you swap Greene for Doege. Doege comes in. He's not looking at the line. Yep. Frazier snaps it, goes 20 yards behind him, and that really it wasn't the one reason for the loss, but that's a huge reason why they did lose the game in the end. So it has potential, the whole 2 QB set, but it has a lot to be worked out still too.
Well, I was actually going to segue there. That did West Virginia's quarterback flip-flopping of Jarret Doege, the veteran who has not progressed where many would think he should have progressed, and Garett Greene, the inexperienced younger quarterback who many want to be the starter and want to be the next guy, but there are still some things to see from him, like, say, him throw a football in an actual game.
Yeah.
But did that actually eventually lead to West Virginia losing this game? It, of course, worked early. Garett Greene got the touchdown. It kind of caught Oklahoma off guard. But it also appeared to me that they kind of got together at halftime, realized this was going to be a thing of the entire game, schemed against it a little bit better. And then the Mountaineers, of course, had a series of penalties, especially late in the game, that did seem to be because they had 2 different quarterbacks continuously getting out there that were forgetting snap counts. It was actually causing problems for the offensive line that looked much better in the first half and then went back to their old ways in the second half. Did the quarterback flip-flopping actually bite them in the you-know-where at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think it did, unfortunately. It worked out well in the beginning with Greene's dual threat ability, but as the Sooners adjusted, they really kind of locked in on him. And when he's in the game, you know it's going to be a run with him. He passed the ball 3 or 4 times for little screens out to Winston Wright most of the time. So when he's in the game, it's going to be a run.
Right.
And so when he's in the game, it's just. It's very one-dimensional. And it was nice having that threat in the first half, but as the Sooners adjusted, it really kind of killed the momentum at times and allowed the offensive line to get a rhythm. And as you saw at the end of the game there with the game on the line, the bad snap kind of happens because of that miscommunication from QBs being swapped in and out every couple plays or so. So I think it has potential, but it has a lot to be worked out still.
We've seen that work in college football before. I mean, obviously
Yeah.
it's not going to work in the NFL, but we've seen Florida win a national title doing it. We've seen teams do that. That's how Tim Tebow became a college football quarterback and then a college football hero, is kind of the Garett Greene role, where he would get in there as the backup on these run plays, maybe a little passes here or there. Florida won a national title. He took over the next year and became the Tim Tebow that everyone remembers. That would, I guess, be a ceiling for Garett Greene. But if you're going to, of course, have the concerns, can he throw it enough? Can he show enough as a quarterback to be the starter, to be the guy, which is why I'd imagine Neil Brown hasn't pulled the trigger, which is why there's still question marks and concerns for some others, no matter how Jarret Doege plays. Now, sticking on the quarterbacks here for a second, because, of course, it's going to be a topic all freaking year. And it really, it just is. There's no way to avoid it. Jarret Doege, 20 for 30 in the game. So not horrendous, 160 in terms of yard, doesn't get into the end zone, does have a pick, but as we mentioned earlier, that pick kind of was like a punt, even though kind of a boneheaded decision as well. A quarterback rating of over 104. The stats don't say that was a bad outing. It doesn't say it's a great outing either, but it does say it's an outing that's maybe good enough to win if you're in a low-scoring affair like these teams were. It's not like Rattler actually played all that much better, even though there's a little bit more yards for him. Garett Greene, 3 for 5, 19 yards, and 91 rating. And then, of course, what he did on the ground, including the touchdown. But in terms of Jarret Doege, who is still the starter for this team until we're told otherwise, how did he play for you? How has he played all year? And what is he still not doing if this team is going to get to the next level this season? Because obviously his career is about this year now on what's left, but this is still a young season. They almost beat the number 4 team in the country. They did beat the number then 15th ranked team in the country, Maryland's in the past. If they steal one of these upset wins, if they do get some of these wins later on in the year, they're still winnable games. They could end up with a solid season, but can Jarret Doege take them there is still a major question mark.
Well, I think tonight and really the whole season so far, he hasn't been good enough. And that's pretty clear to see. I mean, stat line, he was okay. 20 for 30 for 160 yards is okay.
Yeah.
It all came on underneath slant routes, which is fine. I mean, take what the defense can give you. His best role is taking those short slants and letting the receivers run with the ball. And
right.
It worked out for most of the game. But I mean, beyond 5 yards, there's nothing there. He's not going to hit. He's not going to hit any kind of deep route for anyone. I mean, he missed on every deep route. There was a drop early on. There's drops have happened in the past. So it's not all his fault, but his offense is all dink and dunk, screens and slants, and that worked out okay today. But he's not a guy who'll win you a game with his arm. He'll do enough to not lose you the game most of the time.
Most of the time, yeah.
Most of the time. And tonight he wasn't good enough tonight. I'll stick with that. He wasn't good enough, but it wasn't like he was awful either. I mean, he made enough plays to keep them in the game, obviously.
Right.
It's just he's what he is a game manager. I mean, he'll make the short throws, he'll make the slants, and that's fine. But he's not a guy who will hit he won't hit deep throws. He won't even hit intermediate throws with absolute consistency like he needs to do. And I mean, the same can be said for Garett Greene, though. We're not sure what he is yet still. And I mean, there's a fine line between riding with Doege, who, as of right now, I mean, I think he gives the best chance of winning, but opposed to giving Greene a chance and saying, go out there and we'll see what you got.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to go next, because, again, it's pretty clear Jarret Doege, I guess he's maybe progressing in terms of being a little smarter than he even was earlier in the year. Certainly then against Maryland, maybe he's learned from that game. Against Maryland, he did try to force some throws when his arm wasn't going to take him there, and it led to those interceptions. It led to overall turnovers for the team. He had 2 picks. They had 4 turnovers. That absolutely decided that game against the Terps. And in this game, the one picks like a punt. So otherwise, he basically just did the dink and dunk game manager and basically said, I'm not going to single-handedly lose this game for my team. He didn't do that. But he's also not going to win it for you. And there are some that feel maybe Garett Greene has that potential, even though we haven't seen it. So it feels like there's a ceiling with Jarret Doege. This team has shown they can be competitive against very, very good competition one way or another. Have you seen enough from Garett Greene to maybe go to him if you're Neil Brown? And what would you need to see from Garett Greene to go to him? This season still can be saved, even though now you're 2-2. A 3-point loss to number 4 Oklahoma is certainly not the end of the line, but the schedule won't get any easier. And it does also kind of feel like Jarret Doege might give you the best chance to win. He is still the experienced veteran. Garett Greene is an unknown, but maybe Jarret Doege's best isn't good enough to actually beat good teams at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think Garett Greene's the shiny new toy. I mean, look at Oklahoma tonight. They were
Right.
booing and chanting for Caleb.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, it's always nice to have that guy who can come in with the potential. And
Right.
as of right now, that's all Garett Greene is potential. I mean, we're still not quite sure what he is yet. I mean, he hasn't really shown off his arm against an actual FBS team yet.
Would you add some packages where he throws off that arm? Because obviously that is a risk. If he doesn't have it, then potentially you're turning the football over. West Virginia is clearly going to be in close games if they're going to beat anybody who's good. So are you risking unleashing him as a quarterback, not just a runner? That also could cause some controversy and take some confidence away from Doege, who is clearly still your starter. It's easier said than done to throw some packages in for Garett Greene to be more of a thrower than a few just dink and dunks.
Yeah, well, at this point, I think you have to. I mean, you're 2-2 now. And see, like you mentioned, the season's not done yet. There's a lot to go. But at this point, with the record and how you played so far, there's no point not to give him like a longer chance to show off what he can do with the arm. I mean, obviously he's still going to be used mainly for run packages, but give him a throw, give him a drive here or there. I mean, we're playing Texas Tech next. Not the best Texas Tech team, got blown out by Texas today. So, I mean, if you can give him a drive here or there against Texas Tech, let him unleash the arm a little bit, see what he can do.
Right.
I don't see any harm in that. I mean, I think it's only beneficial for him. I mean, obviously, Doege's still the guy for Neil Brown. That's not going to change.
Yeah.
As much as the fans might want it, that's not going to change
Right.
Anytime soon here. But I do think it'd be beneficial to give Garett Greene some actual reps with his arm too.
I'm kind of surprised, maybe pleasantly so, because I do think it's best for the team right now, even if Jarret Doege is still your starter, that Neil Brown has adjusted a little bit to get Garett Greene into these games more so. We're not far from Neil Brown basically telling everybody Jarret Doege is the guy, sink or swim, Garett Greene's the future, but not right now. He's moved off of that position where he is willing to allow Garett Greene to not only get some run plays, but he did throw 5 passes in this game, even though they're not really deep passes that show you anything. He's getting them out there on the field a little bit more, kind of giving him experience on the fly. That's a positive for maybe seeing more from Garett Greene. Maybe that's putting some pressure on Jarret Doege. He's at least not making the mistakes he made earlier in the year. But Texas Tech certainly feels like a winnable game, to say the very, very least, although Jarret Doege had his worst game of the year against Texas Tech, a similar team just a year ago, even though that was on the road. Karl Ludwig of WVU Sports now here on our WVU Postgame show. The Mountaineers lose a heartbreaker in some ways, 16-13. I don't think anyone thought WVU would win this one, but I don't think anyone thought WVU would even have this be as close. And for anyone who didn't watch, that wakes up tomorrow morning and looks at the box score, they're probably going to wonder, what the hell happened for it to have been that close? And it took a walk-off field goal game winner for Oklahoma to get the victory and remain undefeated. Now, I do want to talk some Sooner football. I do want to talk the Mountaineers preview their next game and what's coming up as well here. Of course, here on our post-game show on PSL and WVSN. But, Karl, before we get there, what has allowed this defense to play so well recently? Because they also started a little sluggish maybe against Maryland, even though that game was more of an issue from the offense. They were better than people thought a year ago, despite controversy. Darius Stills is gone. Dante's picking up where he left off. But the defense was all over the place. The secondary, which has been a weakness for this team for years, was swarming, caused the turnover. That was a full team effort that caused that takeaway. It really feels like that just as much as the defense let the offense down in that Tavon Austin 500-plus yard game, this offense let this defense down, and this defense got a victory in this one, even though it doesn't end up as a team win.
Yeah, I mean, the defense was incredible tonight. I mean, they won the game. I mean, I know it's an L for them, the team, but the defense was incredible tonight. And I mean, it really was a full team effort. The front D-line was incredible. They were all over Rattler tonight. I mean, he wasn't his best game, but I mean, there was a big reason why it wasn't his best game. That was the West Virginia defense. Yeah. And then the secondary was like you mentioned, they were all over the receivers tonight. Linebackers were pretty strong in coverage.
I haven't seen the secondary play that well in honestly.
I haven't either. They were fantastic. I mean, the reason, I mean, it goes hand in hand. The defense is the secondary they're stopping coverages, and then the front seven's making those rushes. I mean, it goes hand in hand. But they were very good tonight. They were good enough to win tonight. That's for sure.
Did Dante Stills do anything for his draft stock to this point? Because he came back to play another year of college football. This is his first of his life, really, without his brother there. Some thought, okay, you're not the hype of Darius Stills. You're not winning the individual awards. You're in his shadow, but you should still go to the NFL, get that free agency contract, if nothing else. And that ended up how Darius got into the NFL at that point, didn't get drafted. But Dante Stills as an individual for you, how has he been this year? What is he doing to his individual stock? Because it feels to me like he's been able to step away from his brother's shadow, that if they left in the same year, that might not have been the case, but he is now becoming the leader of the defensive line by himself. And regardless of these team wins individually, he's picking up a victory this year.
Yeah, I mean, he was great tonight. I mean, I think he's great every game, but tonight, I think especially we saw him almost it was him and Mesidor tonight on DLM were great. Right. Whenever you saw a stop, it was always 55 in there making the play. I mean, he's just so quick on the ball. I mean, Rattler's not he's not a huge runner. He's not a super fast guy, but when Stills is running behind him, catching him from behind, he's a D lineman catching a quarterback. He's a phenomenal athlete. And I think tonight was just like the next showing of him playing well by himself now without his brother. And I think maybe one game doesn't help his stock that much, but it all adds up, and he's played well all season. So I think it will help him in the end. And it was just another great overall effort from him and the whole defense tonight.
Yeah. It's just one that the team let get away really at the end of the day, even though the offense did not play all that well. In all honesty, Oklahoma wins it 16-13 again here at WVU Postgame Show on Pittsburgh Sports Live and, of course, WV Sports Now. Head over to WV Sports Now for all our postgame coverage right now. It's on that site, including our game recap. Now, I did want to give it equal sides here, offense and defense, and certainly the defense deserves a game ball despite the loss here, in all honesty. But I do want to discuss something that is still a topic before we get to maybe Oklahoma a little bit. Are they fool's gold? They're number 4 in the country. They got to win, but really, how good are they? Leddie Brown, 15 carries, 56 yards, an average of 3.7. He had a 20-yarder in there. This is a man that had yet to get 100 yards on the ground after a couple games into the year. This is a man whose average per carry in each of these games has been under 4 every step of the way. And this is a man who has a lot of hype entering this season after a great year last year. You certainly could say the offensive line has not been good enough to help him, but great running backs eventually make up for it. There have also been some that criticize the team. They haven't gone to the running back and given him enough carries, even though it's hard to do that when you're trailing, say, against Maryland, or you're up by 30-plus against LIU. This was a closer game. The running might have helped Jarret Doege. Garett Greene certainly took some of those carries. But what's going on with Leddie Brown? Is it as simple as the offensive line is not helping him out, or is he simply not doing as much as he did last year? And what needs to happen in terms of Leddie Brown? Because at the end of the day, he got to stack better stats, or talking about draft stock, talking about pro potential. It's going to end up being a killer for him negatively if these are the numbers. He got to put up at least a 100-yard rushing day one time this year, you would imagine. And once again, despite a close game, overall numbers, not a good day for Leddie Brown.
Yeah. You can't blame the offensive line for him. I mean, it doesn't help the whole time, but I mean, he's a great running back, and like you mentioned, he does have to make his own lanes occasionally. And I think that the offensive game plan maybe isn't, like you mentioned, it isn't like going to him as much as it probably should. I think a lot of his touches may be going to like quick slants or short screen passes, and I mean, when he has the game plan probably shouldn't be to have Doege throw 30 passes. That's probably not the best recipe for success. 15. I mean, if he has half the touches that Doege does in the air, it's probably not your best plan. I mean, against Virginia Tech, he got the ball early, long touchdown run, and he kind of just pounded away at the Tech defense. Tonight, Didn't go his way, like you mentioned. He just whenever he got the ball, it just seemed like there was 3 or 4 guys just piling on top of him, and it happened like almost every play. And I think it was just tough for him to get going. And when he only has 15 carries, he wasn't much of a factor in the passing game either. It's just you have to give him the ball more.
I was going to say, is it ever a point, and this sometimes occurs with elite running backs, where even if they don't have it going, you got to just feed them the rock?
Yeah,
is that the issue, that Neil Brown is almost scared to feed him the rock if he doesn't have it going, and eventually you just got to bite the bullet and say, I know he doesn't really have it, but I got to feed him. At the end of this game, as your game plan, if you're a head coach, Karl, would you say to yourself eventually, I cannot leave this game unless Leddie Brown has 20 carries minimum? If he doesn't have 20 carries and we lose, I did something wrong. You just got to feed him more?
Yeah, well, I mean, he is your best player on offense, and I think he does have to have like more of a presence in the game plan. I mean, 15 carries is enough for him. I mean, it's tonight especially with the way the game is going, low scoring, kind of pound the ball away, long drives. I do think the slants and the quick throws were kind of like the runs today.
Kind of, sure.
But, I mean, he does. I think he has to have more than 15 carries, and if he's not getting the carries, I think you have to give him the ball on those slants or on those screens, because he is he's a very capable receiver. He can catch the ball well. He's pretty elusive with the ball in his hands. I mean, I do think he needs to be more centered in this game plan heading forward.
Yeah, and to be fair, as we have a couple of chatters telling us right now, it could be that when you're a 2,000-yard rusher and clearly the offense is hinged on you, eventually defenses are going to sit around in their war room prior to games and say, well, we're not going to let Leddie Brown beat us, and we're going to make Jarret Doege beat us. Certainly after all the film they've been watching this year of Jarret Doege showing he can't beat you, maybe that's another ding on Jarret Doege as your future starter, that maybe that wouldn't be schemed against as much if you did have Garett Greene in there, because at least you'd be scheming against 2 runners rather than just Jarret Doege, who is a game manager. But again, it feels like you guys got to feed him at some point here. Anything West Virginia can do offensively, if Jarret Doege is your starter,
well, if he's your starter,
what can they do to help Leddie Brown out? Because as you mentioned, maybe use him as a receiver in those slant routes, because at the end of the day here, 2 receptions, -4 yards as a receiver. This is after 15 carries, 56 yards, 3.7 as a runner. If you're going to do the slant yardage for Jarret Doege, because that's his most efficient way of having completions, then maybe going to Leddie Brown for those as a receiver. Maybe let him do that LaDainian Tomlinson, 50 yards on the ground, 50 yards as a receiver, if that's the way to get him involved. But he's your best player, and he's flat out not involved in these games, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, with Doege in the game, there really isn't like a deep threat. And be more honed in on him than it usually would be with someone else. And if that's the way going forward, then he'll have to just deal with that to an extent. I do think that they'll have to get games, try to get him rolling early, because when he against Virginia Tech, touchdown early, 80 yards. He has 161 yards in the game. If he can get the ball and get rolling early, he is a guy who can move downhill very quickly and get going like that. So more carries, more creativity in getting him the ball, and really the whole offense in the ball, getting the ball around. In the first drive of the game tonight, it was very creative, lots of different looks, some jet sweeps and stuff like that.
Right.
I think it's tough. I mean, obviously defenses are locked in on him more so than they were last year, after having a whole year to kind of like watch him a bit more on tape. But you have to give him the ball, and you have to do it in ways that aren't just runs up the middle of the defense. Because I mean, he's a guy who can get you 30 yards on any given play.
Right.
So some creativity, making him more of a game plan, maybe using more as a receiver, I think will help him kind of break out more as season moves on. And it hasn't been easy games for him either so far. It's been tougher opponents going. So
sure. The schedule will get easier than what it's been the last 2 weeks moving forward here. That's true. Texas Tech coming, Baylor, TCU, then Iowa State, who's a ranked team. But you're going to have now several games in a row not against ranked opponents, in which the Mountaineers might be favored in those games after back-to-back against top 15 teams going into the game. Karl Ludwig of WVU Sports Now here, Mike Asti, our WVU postgame show. The Mountaineers lose 16-13, a walk-off game-winning field goal for Oklahoma, who entered the game as the number 4 team in the country. And forget conference realignment in the future of the Big 12 for a moment and them going to the SEC. This year, they're in the Big 12. This year, they did appear to be the best team in the Big 12, and they have still been winning, and everyone else has kind of had their hiccups. Clemson losing on this day. It's been a wild day around college football. They certainly could stabilize that ranking, but there's already a situation where fans are calling for the backup quarterback. The offense has looked stagnant now for several weeks in a row. They have really never looked great this year, even though they have been winning. How good or not so good is Oklahoma? And do you think they have a shot at the playoff this year, or are they destined to get tripped up regardless of what else happens, because this is just a weaker Oklahoma team than in recent years?
Well, on paper, at the beginning of the year, this was Lincoln Riley's best team on paper, but watching the games now, clearly this isn't his best team. I mean, the offense is inconsistent. The offensive line is kind of suspect. Rattler isn't taking a big step forward after a decent year last year.
Right.
There really isn't much of a run game for him either. The defense was good today against a bad West Virginia offense, but this is just a team that's kind of average for Oklahoma, maybe a bit below that for Oklahoma. I mean, this is no Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Jalen Hurts kind of offense here. They're not going to score 55 points a game heading forward now.
Right.
They're still a good team, probably still best in the Big 12, but that's not really saying much. The Big 12 is a mess right now.
It is. I mean, the only thing they can hang their hat on is the Big 12 is a mess right now, but the ACC is arguably a mess right now as well. Yeah. If Clemson now having a loss, if Clemson does not end up being the powerhouse they normally are out of that conference, the ACC could get shut out of the playoff this year. Right? Clemson could still, and Clemson probably still going to win the conference, but maybe they will get tripped up again. They almost lost last week to Georgia Tech. They do lose to North Carolina State. Who knows? Maybe Kenny Pickett and Pitt will end up with some upset wins and turn their season around despite their loss to Western Michigan. So that ACC is wide open. Miami, Virginia Tech could crawl back in there based on now what's happened with Clemson. Of course, the Big 12 now wide open. The Pac-12 wide open. It's really wide open in college football, except for the fact that Alabama pretty much has the SEC secured, but you never know with this wild asinine season. So there's certainly still a chance as long as Oklahoma's winning these games, because winning a close one where you don't look good is better than losing a close one in overtime. Win. Yeah. Right, a win is a win. You'd rather be Oklahoma right now than you would be Clemson. Clemson has lost, Oklahoma has won. A win is a win. But as you mentioned, Oklahoma offensively, they hung 76 points on Western Carolina, but that's at Western Carolina. 40 points on Tulane. Granted, they allowed 35. And then these past 2 weeks, 16-13 over West Virginia, an average team in their conference right now that's looking to get back to glory, but not there nearly just yet. And then the week earlier, 23-16 win over Nebraska, who, again, has not been good this year. And while they're maybe progressing to where they were in recent years, that's a team that Oklahoma should have been beating by double digits at least, if not 20-plus points. They have not been covering these spreads. So if you're a bettor and you see Oklahoma out there with a 17-point spread, I'd be taking it every single time based on what you're seeing here. Yeah, these opponents are clearly going to be covering based on the Oklahoma team right now. What does Oklahoma have to do, though, to get better? Is it just Rattler playing better, or is it more? Because if it's just him, you still would imagine there would be some points on the board with just all the talent around him. But defensively, they looked better in this game than in recent weeks. But there's so much talent there, it feels like you could still maybe have something emerge because they have been winning, but also, again, it doesn't look like that great of an Oklahoma team.
Yeah, I think they're still the class of the Big 12, but it's not saying all that much. I think it's not just Rattler, though. I mean, he wasn't very good tonight, per se, but it wasn't like he had much help either. Right. I mean, the offensive line was beaten down by West Virginia's front seven.
Yeah.
That wasn't much of a run game either. I mean, they have some very explosive playmakers in that team. They're still very, very talented. The talent gap there is still very high, but the team in general just doesn't seem very, very cohesive. I mean, they seem very disjointed. Rattler plays hero ball a bit too much, trying to force throws in tight windows that aren't there sometimes. I think it does come down to him kind of just taking a Jarret Doege and making the simple plays, letting his more talented receivers and running backs make the plays themselves. He didn't have to have an 80-yard touchdown pass every play. I think he can dump it off on occasion. He can take the shorter play that will keep the drive going, opposed to forcing a tight ball in a window that's not open for him. Like tonight he did the same thing multiple times, and it burned him in the end. Maybe not all the way, but it didn't help him.
Yeah, and it's the same thing that's going on in Clemson when you're following Trevor Lawrence, or you're following the myriad of Oklahoma quarterbacks that have all been vying for Heisman trophies, and you're guaranteed to get that type of hype when you enter a season because you are an Oklahoma quarterback, you are a 5-star kid. Maybe you're trying to do too much. Maybe you're trying to press. Maybe you're feeling the pressure. Maybe he has a 5-star kid behind him, unlike them where they solidified the job. Maybe that pressure is not good for him. Who knows? Certainly Rattler needs to be better. You feel like he should be able to carry them through games like this, and he almost wasn't good enough to even get them to win at all, even though at the end of the day, he almost ended up with 300 yards passing. But with all that talent around him, certainly should have more than 16 points on the board. You got to finish those drives and score. And if that means not always going for the big play, maybe that is what it means. Karl Ludwig here of WVU Sports Now as we get towards our second half of this post-game show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. And that will be a segue into my next question for you, Karl, and then we'll preview Texas Tech. And it's something that our Julia Mallet brought up here to us at halftime. It's something that Chatter just brought up there in the chat. West Virginia, 9 second-half points against FBS competition. So throw Long Island out the window right now. Is that on Neil Brown? Is that on quarterback play? Who's responsible for that? And what's going on there? Because I will tell you, it feels like with everything we've said to this point and it all being true, if West Virginia could do it a little bit more in the second half in this game, even matching what they did in the first half, they would have won this, because Oklahoma did not play any better in the second half, but West Virginia just seems like their adjustments at halftime make the team actually worse offensively, as outstanding as that sounds.
Yeah, and this game was almost a carbon copy of last week as well. They come out last week. The only difference was a bigger first half lead. They had a bigger lead the first half. Come out first possession field goal.
Yeah.
Nothing after that. Today, they come out.
It's a better lead to hold on to. Yeah, for dear life.
Lead today, field goal. Nothing after that. So I think it does come down to play calling and execution. I think they had to remain creative in the second half and really try to push for more plays and more points. 9 points isn't going to cut it in 3 games like this. Obviously, it's been 2 of them been losses. One of them probably should have been a loss last week as well.
Imagine if that was a loss. Yeah.
At that point, that'd be a whole different story at that point. But yes, I do think it's a little bit of both. I think you have to continue to really push the ball in the second half. You can't just kind of sit back and hope for. You can't play to lose the game. You have to continue playing to win the game. You can't sit back and hope that Doege just doesn't turn the ball over. That's not going to work. It hasn't worked yet. I think you have to really hope and let him kind of like run the offense and let him take the shots down the field, which he hasn't done yet. Because the offense is pretty predictable at this point. It's a lot of slants, a lot of screens. There really isn't a threat of him kind of taking a deep shot to open up the defense or anything like that. It's just he takes what's given to him, which is nice, but there isn't a threat of like them taking a deep shot or anything like that to have any like quick strike offense of any kind at any point.
It also feels like that Neil Brown gets more conservative and less aggressive in the second half. We saw him go for it on that 4th and 4 early in games. We've seen him go for it early in games, and then late in games shies away. And as you said, plays not to lose when they do have a lead. They held on for dear life against Virginia Tech and got the Black Diamond Trophy. This lead wasn't nearly big enough to do that against a quality team like Oklahoma, who, while Rattler didn't have a solid day, he did what Doege couldn't do. 6 for 7 on the final drive, did just enough to drive them down the field. There he didn't try to do too much. He did enough and eventually led them to a victory. Maybe if Jarret Doege can't do that for you and he's still the best guy for you as your starter and Garett Greene's not ready yet as a QB, maybe you still have to do something else in terms of involving your receivers, involving Leddie Brown. If you have a 3-point lead, that maybe is where you can ground and pound and hand it off to Leddie Brown. Maybe that's where you go for it on 4th and 1 to Leddie Brown rather than worry about Jarret Doege with a slant pass. Whatever the case may be, it does feel like when you're playing against a team that nobody expects you to beat, now you are 2-2. It's a team that you never beat prior. You already have a loss on your record prior to the game. Let's face it, there's tons of reason why to just throw all your chips in the middle of the table. And it seems like Neil Brown is scared to do that in the second half, but in the first half to start game, it's all gung-ho to be really aggressive. I don't know what's going on there mentally, but again, that appears to be the case here. Now, Karl, as we go to our fourth quarter and our 2-minute drive here of this post-game show, I do want to preview next week. West Virginia, Texas Tech. That was a game that West Virginia lost last year. Jarret Doege did not play well in his homecoming. This now a winnable game for the Mountaineers. Texas Tech, again, not looking that great. West Virginia has been playing better, even though their offense has not really. And they should have won this game. They did win a game 2 weeks ago against a top 15 team. What are the keys to the game for West Virginia, Texas Tech? What does West Virginia need to do to beat Texas Tech? And is there an opportunity that Texas Tech could actually shock West Virginia and make WVU vulnerable for the upset here? Because, again, they're playing better than Tech, and Tech is playing bad. But if West Virginia keeps playing like this, it feels like anyone could beat them.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a chance to lose a game like that, especially coming off of a very emotional game like this one. The hangover chance could be there. I don't think it will. I think the defense is strong enough to hold them and allow the offense to kind of just do enough to get by. I think this would be a big game for them still, though. This would be a big test of what they can bounce back and do against. It's still a Big 12 conference game. It's still a big game for them. They have to show that they can win these conference games, and I think it'll be a big test for Doege to show that he can run the offense and bounce back. Wasn't his best game tonight. Wasn't awful, but I mean, bounced back from last year as well. Just to show that he's a capable Big 12 quarterback, which to this point in his career, he hasn't really shown that yet.
I also think just personally, he doesn't want to lose another game to Tech. I mean, that's where his brother played. That's where Neil Brown and him had that initial connection when he was in 8th grade. Last year's homecoming didn't go the way he would want it. It's arguably his worst game of his college career, if you maybe could argue Maryland. But he doesn't want to leave with that taste in his mouth if nothing else occurs. It certainly is a winnable game. It certainly is a team they're going to be favored to beat. And then, of course, the schedule does get a little easier while in conference play the next couple weeks after that, before they then have Iowa State, who is currently a ranked team as well. That's not going to be easy by any means, and I'm sure there are going to be more losses on this schedule, but potentially more wins as well, more big games for West Virginia, and more chances to prove themselves. This was against the number 4 team in the country, so let's also remember, even though I think we all can agree, and I'm seeing that a lot on Twitter, Oklahoma's not really a playoff team. They're not deserving of the 4. They prove they're not good enough. I don't think they're as good as recent years either, but West Virginia still lost by 3 to the number 4 team in the country, to a playoff team, and it's very possible that based on everything else going on around college football, that Oklahoma, who is still winning, could crawl into that 4 spot still. So counting them out would not be a positive plan, because they could also turn this around and the quarterback could start playing better. West Virginia caught them on a solid week and didn't get the job done. It's one they let get away, but they still did lose the number 4 team in the country and still did beat a top 15 team 2 weeks ago. And it feels like if they could have took care of the football a little bit better against Maryland, they would have won that game. Yep. So despite all the issues, this is a West Virginia team that maybe hasn't had the easiest road to this point, but actually hasn't played as horrendous. Granted, it hasn't played that well either. They're an enigma. West Virginia is just always an enigma. They're 2 sides of the coin all the time. That'll do it for this edition of the post-game show here. The Mountaineers lose a heartbreaker 16-13 on the road to Oklahoma, currently the number 4 team in the country. So losing to a playoff team, the Mountaineers now will pivot and take on Texas Tech as Jarret Doege looks for revenge against his childhood team from last year's defeat. For Karl Ludwig and all of us at WV Sports Now, and of course Pittsburgh Sports Live, the Mountaineers that close, almost heaven yet again.